Good morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm George Moss again here at allpointstv.com and also WFOV 92.1, the great radio station there that is being marshaled by the great visionary here in Flat. That is none other than Mr. Paul Herring. Want to thank him again for allowing us to be a part of his network. We are allpointstv.com, and the program here is What's Going On. And we tape the program normally from 2 to 3 on Mondays. We're taping this time in the aftermath of the holiday. Hope you had a nice 4th of July. We're out in the backyard, not making too much noise out there, so we're doing it in my neighborhood.
I think
were they making a lot of noise in your neighborhood? A lot of firecrackers. And
from like 6 in the afternoon.
Those bombs that I guess they were cherry bombs, they call them.
Oh, they're firecrackers. I mean, and then some people had the stuff that was almost like on par with the fireworks display, the aerial shots that they would have like by municipalities. There was one guy around my corner from my house. He had set up 2 or 3. It sounds like a mortar. They call it, usually set them off with a mortar, and they go up and they blow up over and they get the sparkles and all that. And it was just as impressive as anything I've seen the cities put on. So
is that right?
He had 3 or 4 of those rounds like this. So
in your neighborhood?
Yeah, just around the corner from my house. So.
Yeah, I think a lot of them, given the fact that they don't even know what they're celebrating, a lot of them just out there making noise. We went out there 2 days before the holiday, and the ordinance inside, I don't know what it is in Flint, but I know the ordinance in the township is that you can go out there and have firecrackers and all that noise you make 1 day before the holiday, and then the day of the holiday and the day after. Is that the way it is in the city also?
Well, that's what it's supposed to be, but
a week ahead of time.
Now they're out there, and there's actually had a fireworks display guy selling that stuff. We'll be hearing them tell probably sometime around the first of the year. Then they'll have the first of the year, the New Year's thing, and they've involved shooting guns and also explosives and stuff. So basically, it's like after then it wanes for a couple months, about a month or 2 after the New Year. But from now until about. Yeah, you'll see here sporadically somebody decides to set off their little cash,
Yeah, they're just out there making noise. You ask them what is the meaning of the holiday, and they can't tell you what July the 4th is representative of. We went out there. They had some of these teenagers out there. We live across the street from the apartments, and so they came out there. This is like 6 o'clock in the morning, 2 days before the holiday, and they started shooting those firecrackers and all of that. We went out there. And we said, you're not supposed to be out here shooting those firecrackers except for the day before the holiday, the day of the holiday, and the day after the holiday. And you're not supposed to be out here. I was surprised when they packed up and left. I thought I was going to have to fight.
Yeah, I was going to say that usually means fights on, or at least a lot of swear words at you,
Yeah, I'm in the township, so, but if they had not left, I know what I was going to do. I was not going to take no for an answer. I didn't want to hear that noise at 6 o'clock in the morning.
How'd your dogs handle that?
And that's another thing that really gets in the house. The dogs are terrified. They can't understand what's going on, and you have to constantly remind them that they're safe. You have to calm them down, and it was just terrifying for them. They tell me that during this time period, a lot of dogs come up missing.
Yeah, they'll do that. They'll just get so scared that they'll run out of the house and they're disoriented, especially a loud bangs and if it's kind of like fireworks display, actual like flash. Yeah, that'll really. I've seen a couple of dogs tragically got killed because they got so scared up they ran into the street and got hit by cars.
I have 2 dogs. I got a boxer and I got a golden retriever, and they were coming to me looking in my face as if I'm causing all that noise. I was saying, they were barking at me and snarling. How they get real nasty sometimes with their personalities, and they were blaming me as if they were blaming me for it. I was telling them, I'm not out there. I'm not the one out there making all that noise.
You ever heard they got some shirts? They got a shirt they could put on dogs for thunderstorms. Plus, some fireworks display things would also work for this. I mean, it's like what they call a thunder shirt, and they put it on. It gives them kind of a warm feeling, like it's like compresses around their chest, and it makes them feel more like secure for some reason. So you might want to look into that.
Yeah, I want to look into that next year then, because they were really frenetic this past holiday. Just simply could not understand why that gun. Some of it was gunfire. It wasn't just the firecrackers. Some of the people out there shooting too. And I'm going to go out there next time and give a test, John. I'm going to ask them if they know who Thomas Jefferson is. You ever heard of the Declaration of Independence? Okay, and then yesterday I went to, we did a program out here at Bluebell Beach. John, I hadn't been out there. You know, it was my first time out there. That's a beautiful, my first time in all these years.
Oh, that is beautiful. They got that monument.
That's a beautiful beach out there.
They got the Veterans Memorial there and stuff. That's really nice. Yeah.
Tom Summers did a program out there. He's also on WFOV for those that might want to tune this program in. It comes on 5 days a week from 9 to 12, and he does an excellent show. He did an interview of the candidates for the 49th District, and I was fortunate enough to be a part of the panel, and then not so fortunate to be a part of the discussion after the panel had left, and we had another hour to discuss politics. And of course, that's when I started becoming very unpopular.
You know, I'm going to say this, and I never said this real political stuff about local politics, but that one guy who used to be our mayor, now running for, I think he's running for the 49th District. I'm asking you people who are going to vote, why would you vote for a man who failed so miserably as mayor? And, you know, he just blithely walks on and wants to, and that's my opinion. He's like, oh, I want to be a politician. Oh, I know I screwed things up, but that was behind me now. I learned my lesson. I mean, I just like, and it's so infuriating. I'm pissed.
Well, you know, the candidate they're saying is leading in that race. I was impressed. I have to say this about them. I was impressed about the civility of the candidates. How they simply, how they showed a lot of, they were very amenable to each of the candidates that was on the dais. And I was really impressed with the fact that there was no animosity. The most interesting of the candidates, I thought, was Don Wright. And he was saying that he didn't particularly care for politicians, but he said, but I like the ones that are up here. And he made some very interesting points. The front runner, from what I've been hearing in the community, is John Jerry, and that's going to be interesting to see how it plays out in terms of the primaries coming up in November. The primary that's coming up in August, and then the general election in November. It's going to be interesting to see what goes on there. What I want to talk about, though, at the very beginning of the program, is what occurred in the last hour, which is where you have the program then veers into having a town hall kind of meeting among three persons invited into the studio, two main guests that are on there every week, and then they have a third party come in as an invited guest for that particular program. And I'm always very glad to be on there with people like Paul Rozicki and the great Henry Hatter, the long conservative for many years here in, I shouldn't say conservative only, I should say the lone Republican almost in Genesee County. This is a Democratic Party stronghold. And he was a guest, he's one of the hosts, the co-hosts of the program on Wednesdays. I'm always glad to be there with both of them. And I'm always introduced as being the person. They'll say Paul Rozicki to the left, and then they'll say Henry Hatter to the right, and then George Moss to the extreme right.
Yeah, I was talking to a guy one day. This one guy was just amazed that he said, you know, black guy. He's looking at a black person who's like more. He said he's more conservative than I am, and he said I find because we're always accused of being like kind of narrow-minded or conservative or too conservative. He goes, this guy's more conservative than I am, and I just think it's been your years on the planet. I think basically. Yeah,
and also being a historian of some note, I think that I'm qualified to take the positions that I take, and I think the conservative position is the one that has been vacated in the black community to the stress we now find in the black community. When the black community was conservative and was carrying out a conservative agenda, they were making progress. And in fact, John, I will tell you this also on the QTN running. The reason why I was have been banned from Facebook. And they brought all my friends back. They banned some of the persons that I had contact with, and they may be banned for a week, 2 weeks, a month. I've been banned for life, apparently, because I was banned as of October. I'm not back on yet, and I don't think they'll let me back on now that I'm bidding my time waiting for that to happen. I'm doing other things with my time. But the reason why they banned me was because I wrote a 3-part series, and I said the truth, which was that black people's problem in this country, the primary problem that black people have in this country, and the reason why the communities are deteriorating to the extent they're deteriorating is not because of racism. That is the bugaboo and blame all and the panacea notion of what is causing the problems in the black community, which cannot be sustained based upon the evidence. Because if racism was causing it, then we should have seen the same destruction then when racism was at a much higher level in the country, of course, run by the Democratic Party. And of course, nobody want to hear that because 93% of black people are in the Democratic Party and can be counted on religiously to vote Democratic. So they don't want to hear that, but that's historically true.
So, I'm a white guy, and I've lived in the city of Flint all my entire life. My family's been here well over 140 years, my dad's family. And I remember when I was growing up, I heard about, the black community. They actually say there's a black community, and that was like accepted because this is a multi-ethnic area, despite some historians that used to be at U of M who wrote a book that there wasn't that great of a mix here. There really was. It was St. John Street. If anybody lived in Flint knows this guy didn't know what he was talking about, just knowing that. But anyway, but there was the black community, and it was more cohesive. They had, the black entrepreneurs, business people. And a lot of times we did, my grandparents were business people. They did business with them because they got a better deal for supplies. They owned a restaurant and stuff. So I mean, there was a lot of money coming and going between both groups. Of course, GM was booming back then. But I mean, now that I've seen it as I was a kid and growing up, I saw the going by the wayside rapidly. I started school in '68, I think it was, and there were some black-owned businesses over in the North End and stuff. In the '70s and '80s, they're almost fully disappeared. And I don't see how that can be a conducive thing to actually. I don't know if we can be all segregated like the one time we were. I mean, and I'm not advocating that. But we're having people who know how to run their own business and know what a business is a lot better than the politicians we have who have absolutely no bloody idea how a business should be run. And matter of fact, they're almost hostile to businesses. Like George McGovern even admitted after he got out of politics, got involved in running a business, and he was like shocked to realize that all the stuff he pushed through when he was he said, "Oh my God, I did some stupid stuff." Yeah, duh. I mean, and the business people were telling you were doing stupid stuff. You disregarded because you thought they're greedy. But going back to the point, I think the businesses in any area, any business that's actually, as long as it's not selling drugs, I mean more legitimate businesses, are probably going to be good for everybody, black or white, Asian, whatever, intermingled, whatever. To me, more business equals more opportunity and more prosperity and just a simple ease of life. You can go to the store down the street, so they have to go across town. You won't have the food deserts they always talk about, and the ghettos and all that. So I mean, it's like the reason why it's because the people who are small business owners were pushed out of fear, out of over legislation, out of over regulation. And that's what drove everybody's business out. But it's especially worse in the black communities that I saw. And I saw that growing up.
Well, what argues against this notion that the primary bugaboo that's brought about the chaos and breakdown that we see in these black communities and all these urban areas, regardless of what you're talking about, where you're talking about it, whether it's in Saginaw, Flint, Detroit, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Chicago, you name even Birmingham, where I'm from, and which was really a very cohesive community when I was growing up, despite the segregation of people like Bull Connor and some of the others that were the mayors and police commissioners in the city. Bull Connor being the most outrageous one that was in those political positions during that time period. If you would say that racism is the cause of the breakdown we're seeing in the community right now, we should have seen the breakdown much more excellent in those communities when racism was much higher and much deeper and run by the Democratic Party. You didn't see this breakdown. And one of the arguments I was having yesterday, as a matter of fact, on the program during that last hour, with a person that came in just to challenge some things that I was going to say because they heard me on the radio, and they came to join the discussion because they wanted to put me in my place and teach me the errors of my ways. And so I always like that challenge, by the way, because I understand what they're going to say before they even get any words out of their mouths. I know they're going to be mouthing the system nonsense about the breakdown, the black family that come out of slavery, and they bring in, this is one of those white liberals, want to bring in a ton of guilt, white guilt, telling me about white privilege, to which in that case I had to point to the car that I was driving and told I was driving that Lincoln over there is a car that I'm driving and wouldn't show me your car. I was just trying to make the point. You don't have any more privilege than I have. This idea that the white liberals, which has been a cancer, and I called it that. Yes, they are a cancer on the black community, and they still are a cancer until black people understand the role they're playing in this underdevelopment and dividedness we see in our community. The white liberals played a major role in that, teaching black people their disability, and before they can get out the block, they're so disabled by white privilege and the fact that they don't have a chance. Many of them are giving up even before they put forth any kind of an effort. And I put that right where it belongs. And that's why they banned me off of Facebook. They banned me because I was not going to carry the liberals' water. Their canon today is that racism is blocking black people. Therefore, there's something for white folks to do, of course, in terms of bringing some greater designs in the black community toward their own edification and their self-determination. It has to come from the outside, and there's nothing that black people can do until white people get their act in order so that they can come in. By changing the paradigm, they can lift all boats up, of which the black boats are the ones that's most needful of being lifted up. And I'm not buying the nonsense, because if that were the case, then we should have seen this debilitation at the point of the ending of slavery. And I'm going to read something in this book that I brought to document this idea that they have, the liberals have, that slavery discombobulated the black community. I'm going to read something from the document, this book by Herbert Gutman, called The Black Family in Slavery and Freedom from 1765 to 1925, and I want to read some important parts of that book, just small excerpts of it, to disprove this nonsense. If you think that those blacks came off those plantations broken, then you need to be disavowed of the nonsense. But the point I'm making right now is that when I rejected this false notion, and it is a false notion, that racism can explain what we're looking at in the black community, if that were the case, we should have seen it in Harlem in the 1920s, when we saw just the opposite of that, the 1920s, where you had the Harlem Renaissance, where those persons in that community, the Harlem Renaissance, the writers such as Paul Laurence Dunbar, W.B. Du Bois in that community, Claude McKay, Zora Neale Hurston, and others that are assembled in that community and were ferreting out the Harlem Renaissance, which was and I agree with David Levering Lewis, the Harlem Renaissance, that is a civil rights movement posing as an arts movement. And David Levering Lewis is exactly right. These persons were writing letters, writing poems, writing books, writing novels, and so on, so as to prove that black people were not an inferior group, as a way of justifying their demand that they be allowed into the vestiges of freedom, justice, and equality, as all the other groups were, in fact, being invited into the table of brotherhood and sisterhood in the country. And they were writing in the Harlem Renaissance to show their fitness to join the human family. And so it really was a civil rights movement, but it was posing as a arts movement. But the foundation of it was to act as a battering ram against some of the barriers that were out there blocking black people's advancement. But they had not surrendered. And those communities in Harlem, because of the disadvantages that they had, you find that whenever somebody's rent came up, the community was so cohesive that they had what they call rent parties. So over here, your rent is due this week. So therefore, everybody meets at your house. They pay a bit of money to get into the place there. You're going to be selling some spirits on the side, and maybe some hog maw and chitlins or whatever. And people would go there and they would have a rent party, and that person could pay his or her rent during that week. And then the next week they have a rent party somewhere else, because the community was together. You expect, if it was racism that's causing the problems, you would see those communities more broken than they are right now. So when I wrote this article and said that racism cannot explain the problems that we're seeing in the black community today, because racism was at a higher level in the past than is right now, and no one would be so disingenuous to say that racism is much more extant in the country today than it was in our grandparents' day and our grandfathers' day, our grandmothers and grandfathers' day. Nobody would make that claim. If that were the case, King would not be out there trying to stop some of the things that were happening in the Solid South from 1955, starting with the Rosa Parks arrest and then going all the way up until the death of Dr. King in Memphis. For that 13-year period of time, King was trying to push back on the restraints that were in place, and those restraints were put in place for political reasons. Even that wasn't so much about racism as it was about the politics of these politicians. You can sell that racism narrative to those that have not studied the record, but I've studied the record. And you can come to those programs and you go put me in my place, and what you're going to find out is that you're not qualified. You think you're qualified because you've been to the same school being dumbed down as the rest of them that have been dumbed down.
I noticed something that I ran into when I was a kid going to public schools. 95% of the teachers there are largest, are liberals. I saw this condescension and this patronizing tone, coming from them all the time. Infuriated me as a child. I was like, 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, something like that. Child, and I wasn't near even teenage years. And I just was angered by that. I can't see it. And then I see the same kind of attitude when they talk to people of minorities and the white liberals. They have this condescension. It's basically they're
cancer.
They talk to them like they're telling them what their existence is about. And it's like, and then I would, if I was black, I'd say, or any other minority or any other group, or even myself. It's like, no, wait a minute. I live my own life. You're not telling me anything about my life. I know what my life is about. Where are you getting off trying to tell me what my life's about?
I came, they got a book out written by the great Booker T. Washington, who published his autobiography in 1901 called Up From Slavery. Well, I came up from, you would call it today, you didn't call it that then, up from the hood or up from the ghetto. But it wasn't called that then. It was a black community. So we called it what it was. It was a neighborhood, because we had in that environment in Birmingham restricted to certain parts of Birmingham, couldn't go in certain areas, couldn't go to certain schools, couldn't sit in certain areas on public transportation. And public facilities like bathrooms, they were in fact dichotomized, so you had to use the ones over there and the ones over here. But did we feel that we were defeated because of that? No, we were talking about how to empower ourselves under the most extraneous conditions that was designed to hold us back, but we're not able to do so because as long as a person does not, if a person is knocked down and understands as long as he can look up, he can get up. If that's the attitude that the people had, then there's no force on this earth that can keep them down. And we had a can-do attitude. And racism was at the ceiling at that point, but it did not stop anything. We were still turning out scholars in these schools and so on and so forth. So when I wrote, based upon my own research and also my own background, that racism cannot explain these conditions that we're looking at in these communities, then Facebook, these liberals on Facebook, Zuckerberg and the rest of them, censored me. I'd been censored once before, but I was going to write what I wrote and force their hand. And if they wanted to put me off Facebook, that's fine. But I left there with my dignity. And I wrote the problem in Black America, the major problem facing black people today is not racism, because racism, as long as it was in our face, we were fighting to get it out of our face. Some of us were doing it by writing in the Harlem Renaissance. Some of us were doing it by going ahead and proving them wrong by being the best we could be. And we had teachers in the classroom telling us you got to be twice as good, as a way of not making excuses because there were barriers up. The response to the barriers was you have to be more qualified than the other persons are, because there are impediments out there and you have to have the skills so that the impediments cannot block you. And we believe that, and we work toward that, and we found that to be true. I came out of those quote unquote segregated schools, but I have to tell you something. Those schools were no more segregated for blacks than they were for whites. Blacks were segregated from whites, and whites were segregated from blacks. That was no more uneven in the black community it was in the white community. I felt that they were being denied some advantages by not having classes that I was in, because we were scholars in those schools, Patterson Elementary School. Okay, we're going to take a break, and we'll see you in hopefully 4 minutes. You'll come back, and we'll be about where we were when you left. Looking forward to your return.
Right. When I was a kid, going to Williams School, one of the women who I consider one of the best teachers I ever had was a woman named Thaddeus McCrae. I can't pronounce her, but we call her Mrs. McCrae. And she was, I think she was from the same state as you were, from Alabama or Georgia, and she went to predominantly, historically black colleges. She had gone to segregated schools. She had an understanding of Latin, and she could, had references for classical literature. She was also one of the most demanding. I hated her when I was a kid because she kept me 3 hours after school one day because she didn't think I did what I did as well as I could have. Okay, my mom was fully on board with her, but bloody traitor. But anyway, she was like the most demanding teacher I ever had in that school, and because she said, I don't care if you're my."
The students.
You knew her, I think, didn't you, or knew who she was? Yeah. And she was like the most demanding teacher I've known. And I had some other good ones. Okay, I really did. I'm still friends with some of their kids, actually, a couple of them. But she was the most demanding. And she faced the opposition. And she said, I know the value of education. Mm-hmm. So.
And knew it for her students when the students weren't aware of it. When I started to play around in the classroom, or some of my classmates would play around in the classroom wasting time, the teachers would tell us that they had theirs and we had ours to get. And they would remind us of the need to be more than qualified, to be super qualified, to get us back on track. And I never heard any discussions in those classrooms about those persons out there trying to hold black people back, because that was a waste of our time. The question was, what's the antidote to it? What's the solution to it? And what I heard was, you got to be twice as good. And I'll tell you another thing they did in that classroom. They didn't even talk about the reason why we had to be twice as good. They just told us what the solution was. We had to go out there and find out why, because they weren't wasting our time with what they thought was obvious, and they weren't going to waste our time with all this nonsense being imported in our community by the outsiders, like George Wallace and Bull Connor and Sheriff Clark and all these other impediments that were in our way. The Democratic Party, which was which was in black people's way in the South, and is in black people's way right now, and they don't even realize it, because of these white liberals that have brainwashed, have put this notion out here that racism is blocking us. Let's talk about what party is blocking blacks. Somehow that doesn't come up in any of the discussions. It's quite interesting. And now this whole idea is that all the Democrats who were back there blocking black people's advancement, they all went into the Republican Party. They're all Republicans right now, so Donald Trump is a racist.
Except for that guy named Byrd in Virginia. Remember West Virginia with Virginia?
Not Byrd. It was Strom Thurmond.
Strom Thurmond, but I mean, he was the only one I know went to the Republican Party.
Byrd was a Kliegel.
Yeah, but a Kliegel. But he stayed consistently in the Democratic Party.
Yeah, he was in the Democratic Party, but they don't point to him as one of the persons that changed, because Byrd never disavowed his affiliations in the past. It was Strom Thurmond who went from the Democratic Party, having run as a Dixiecrat in the election in 1948, when the Dixiecrats ran their own candidate, which made Truman which caused Truman to have a problem in terms of his election. He was elected against Dewey, and they thought that he had lost the election. The first papers came out and said that Dewey wins, and that means Truman had lost the election. But Strom Thurmond ran in 1948 and split the Democratic Party. Glad to have you back. We're not too far from where you were when you left, and we're glad you're back. We're still talking about the major problem that is facing the black community right now, and I'm disavowing that the problem is racism, because racism cannot be claimed as the impediment. That's more so of an impediment today than it was in our parents' and grandparents' day, because they did not block us going forward at that time. So there must be another reason for it. And I have said on Facebook and other places, said on the radio yesterday, the problem, what has happened in the black community is that black people have adopted liberalism. And it's liberalism that has caused this destruction that we're seeing in the community. Now, those of you who were saying yesterday on that program that it comes out of the brokenness of the family during the time of slavery, and we have never recovered from that. Let me read something to you from a person that did a major study named Herbert Gutman, and he has a book that came out called The Black Family in Slavery and Freedom, 1750 to 1925. But before I read what he wrote, let me read what somebody said about the book. Charles Silverman. Charles Silverman is the author, as you remember, in 1967, authored a book called Crisis in Black and White, and later on wrote a book called Crisis in the Classroom. Here's what Charles Silverman says about the book. I am awed, A-W-E-D, I am awed by his achievements. It is a monumental volume that makes obsolete almost everything that has been written or said about the black experience in the United States. Certainly no one will be able to think about race in the same way again. It will be a long time before I, and I imagine others, will be able to assimilate the full impact of this book, since it requires thorough re-examination of what I and they have written and thought. In other words, Charles Silverman, who was at that time the director of the study of law and justice and wrote some very important books, a book that came out in 1967, came out in 1965 called Crisis in Black and White, a major book, by the way. Here is this person that's writing along the lines of this white liberal jargon that you hear today. He read this book and said that it caused a whole seismic shift in his thinking based upon what's discussed and found in the research. I mean, they had taken the word of those who said that slavery had broken up the black family and was a cause of the breakdown we're seeing right now in the black community. And when I said yesterday, as a matter of fact, on the radio show, that blacks were marrying at a higher rate in the aftermath of slavery, starting in 1865 when slavery came to a close, blacks were marrying at a higher rate during the period of Reconstruction than whites were. And when you state that, then they want to go to this non-discussion and get off the point and get distracted and say, then you're talking about slavery was a good thing. Did I say slavery was a good thing? I said that I was saying something very different that they could not comprehend. I was saying that slavery did not discombobulate black people as it's generally said. And I'm going to read to you why that distortion occurred, and it's right here in Gutman's book. Here's what Gutman says. I read you what Charles Silverman said about the book and what Gutman wrote. Let me read what Gutman wrote. This study is an examination of the Afro-American family prior to and after the general emancipation, but it is also a study of the cultural beliefs and behavior of a distinctive lower-class population. It examines its adaptive capacities at critical moments in its history. Slavery is viewed as an oppressive circumstance that tested the adaptive capacities of several generations of men and women, those who were black, enslaved in the South. To focus on the quote-unquote family also means to focus on culture. Socialization nearly always occurs first in families, and is through families that historically derived beliefs usually pass from generation to generation. The assumption that slaves could not develop and sustain meaningful domestic and kin arrangements denies them that capacity and often serves to, quote, explain, unquote, why so many slaves and their immediate descendants were disorganized, quote, unquote, in their social life and, quote, unquote, pathological in their individual behavior. E. Franklin Frazier. Now, E. Franklin Frazier wrote books on the black family. And he got the wrong information also based upon his study. But let's read what Gutman is doing, coming behind Frazier and making a correction here. He says, E. Franklin Frazier summed up this view of lower class black culture in discussing early 20th century urban migration. Here's what Franklin Frazier said, the one who wrote the book called The Black Bourgeoisie, or The Black Middle Class. Frazier said, having adopted the nonsense, he stated, the widespread disorganization of family life among Negroes has affected practically every phase of their community life and adjustments to the larger white world. Because of the absence of stability in family life, there is a lack of traditions among blacks who were once formerly slaves in this country. Life among a large portion of the urban Negro population is casual, precarious, and fragmentary. It lacks continuity, and its roots do not go deeper than the contingents of daily living. This affects the socialization of the Negro child. He quotes, and I won't quote all of this, but he quotes Alexis de Tocqueville, who put it similarly in his writings a century earlier, who stated the following: there exists indeed a profound and natural antipathy between the institution of marriage and that of slavery. A man does not marry when he cannot exercise marital authority, when his children must be born his equal, irrevocably destined to the wretchedness of their father. In other words, the slave father and the slave child did not have any distinction in their authority. And what de Tocqueville is saying is that because of that, the circumstance of the family and the slaves was debilitating. When having no power over their fate, he can neither know the duties, the privileges, the hopes, nor the cares which belong to the paternal relation. It is easy to perceive that every motive which incites the free man to be a lawful union is lost to the slave by the simple fact of his slavery. So the slave just can't do anything because of the slave condition. Now, let's listen to, again, Gutman based on his research. Here's what Gutman says in the aftermath of this chiming, this choir, this chorus that's taking place of the debilitation of blacks during the time of slavery. Gutman says, Frazier and de Tocqueville did not misperceive the oppressive nature of enslavement, but underestimated the adaptive capacities of the enslaved and those born to them and to their children. In other words, the mistake of Frazier, de Tocqueville, these white liberals today, is that they have not misperceived the horrors of slavery. Slavery was a horrible institution in this country. But what they failed to recognize in the analysis of slavery was that they failed to recognize the adaptive capacity of those who were enslaved. They misperceived the adaptive capacities of blacks in this country. Slavery did not debilitate black people in this country. It does not mean that slavery was not a horrible institution. What it means is that blacks were able to make the necessary adaptations so they can come forward even though those debilitating circumstances were there. We're not talking about slavery being anything other than what it was. We're talking about the strength of blacks before they got into this mindset they can't do anything. And if you say that this understanding that Gutman is putting forth is wrong, then somebody got to explain Frederick Douglass, who escaped from slavery in 1838. And the reason why he ran off that plantation is because his wife-to-be, Anna Mary, was a free black woman, and he was not free. And he was consigned to that plantation, and she was not. And he wanted to get to her and marry her. And he did marry her and stayed married to her from 1838 to 1882. They were married for 38 years. If slavery was debilitating, how do you explain that? And then after slavery came to a close, Goodwin has been very good in documenting the black family was strong, so strong in the aftermath of slavery that blacks were marrying at a higher rate in the aftermath of slavery than whites were. And they're exactly right. His book is dated 1750 to 1925, and that would take you through the Harlem Renaissance, pretty much, the mid part of the Harlem Renaissance, when there were strong families. Somebody ought to go and read some of the poetry that was there that was celebrating the black family at that time. The black family was not beginning to show some decline in terms of this downsizing until 1965. And you see Moynihan writing about it in his work, where he was saying that there is a predicament beginning to occur in the black community, and he had recommended benign neglect. In other words, government do not intrude into the space there. Let the black community do what they've done in the past, and that was to recover based upon its own strengths. But that's not what happened. In 1965, what you had was the importation of Lyndon Baines Johnson's nonsense. Number one, in 1964, with the Voting Rights Act, there was nothing wrong with that in terms of empowering people to go to the polls and vote, to vote the Democrats off of black people's back in the South, which is why the vote was necessary. And that's why King went to Washington in 1957 and demanded the right to vote, because King understood that the reason why the Democratic Party was on black people's back was because black people were disavowed and denied the right to vote. Once they could vote, Democrats would start talking in soprano, which they're doing right now, and now making the claim that all the races have moved out of the Democratic Party and gone to the Republican Party. But what we had here, and Moynihan was speaking to, was let the black community show the resiliency that is shown in the past. He talked about benign neglect, so the government does not intrude into it. Let the black community begin to show the same resilience that it has shown in the past, so it could get up from the circumstance. But no, that's not what happened. What happened was a great society. The socialization of the black community and the liberalization of the black community occurred. And black people who were able to recover from slavery, recover from Jim Crow, recover from riding the back of the bus, go on to what they call segregated schools, made those schools fundamentally outstanding because they didn't have choice. Yesterday in that radio program, everybody was talking about they want choice. So they want to give the kids a choice of going from one building to another, rather than telling them that, and then telling them they got failing schools. I asked them on that program yesterday, I asked them, I have a great relationship with the people on that panel, and I enjoy being there with them. They're some very good people. But I asked some of those panelists, when you took bad grades home to your family, did your parents buy you telling them that the school failed, or were those your grades? How many of you took bad grades home back in the day where you didn't have? Could I have actually said that in the South, because we only had one in my neighborhood. The only school that was available there was Patterson Elementary School from grades 1 to 8, and then Parker High School. You had Parker, you had Ullman, you had Western, and you had Holy Family. Holy Family was a Catholic school. That was somewhat integrated, but we basically were going to go from Patterson to Parker, and Parker was across town, passing by certain schools we couldn't go to, and going to Parker, 52 blocks away, on what we call a special, which is a special bus, a bus that picked us up and carried us to the school over there, which was another quote-unquote segregated school. And we had no choice in the matter but to make those schools work, and we did make those schools work. And the reason why they worked is because there was no excuse making in those schools. talking about choice.
My friend
The
lives.
choice was an affirmative action. That's another part of it. Affirmative action was our homework.
My friend lives down in Alabama. I was just talking about her earlier before we started the show today, and I mentioned you do a show from here, and that you went to Parker, and she goes, "Oh, that school's like considered like one of the top-notch schools of that era and stuff." Because she goes, people pronounce it Paca, and she goes, but it's considered like the best one of the best schools in Alabama to go to.
I had a great education at those two schools, Patterson, from grades 1 to 8, and 9 through 12. Went to Parker High School. First of all, you go to the annex from 9 to 10, then you go to the main campus from grades 10 to 12, and those schools were serious about what they were doing, and they did not allow us to start talking about, nor did our parents talk about the building or the teachers that had failed. And they weren't all great teachers. Some of them were excellent, and some of them were very mediocre, and some were spaced out. They started talking about the lesson, and then before you know it, they're talking about the moon. And you know what we did? We kept I'm grabbing a pencil here. We kept our pencil on the paper as they went off into Spaceville, talking about whatever, and wasn't part of the lesson. We were empowered in those classrooms. We kept our pencil on the paper until they came back from outer space. And when they started talking about the lesson again, we started writing down the notes again. We didn't get out of control because they were over here doing something other than the lesson. We were empowered in those classrooms, and we didn't care I didn't care what the teachers were up there doing, quite frankly, because I was studying the lesson before I went to class. And when I went to class, it was just repetition of what I already knew in most cases. And a lot of students were like that. And the only point I'm making here, not to be braggadocious, the only point I'm making here is that this idea that you need to go and find where education is wherever students are. Wherever there are students and wherever there are teachers, then education cannot not take place unless both of them are disavowing their responsibilities on both sides of the teacher's desk. As long as the teacher is trying to import information and the students are trying to acquire the information that's being imported, then that cannot be failure in those schools. And all I hear is about choice and all these political things that are going on about politicians that don't understand that they're doing a disservice by talking about everything but the student's responsibility to go in that classroom 30 strong and make it happen. If you got 30 students and they're determined to learn, there's no way that school can fail. And it doesn't fail. If they say the building is failing, then we should see the building at some point collapsing. I mean, the failures of building failing. Then some of these building structures ought to collapse then, because if the building is the one that's failing, then wouldn't you expect at some point the crumbling down of the building? It doesn't fail on the weekend. It only fails when there's students in there and when there are teachers in there. My school did not fail because it could not fail because we were in there doing our work. One of the first things, by the way, when I first started teaching, the first shock that I had when I first started teaching was when I took up the homework, and I was called roll because I wanted to make sure that those that were not turning it in could be identified right there in front of the classroom. Because I called the roll, went down the roll, asked for the homework by roll. And when they said they didn't have it, I want to know why. And they would say, well, I wasn't here yesterday. That was the first shock I had as a classroom instructor. Because, and I had been out of school for 4 years and hadn't been going to college, so I had been out of public school. I didn't know it had changed that much. And maybe it hadn't changed that much. Maybe in the North they had a different paradigm. But I know what we did in the South, having to be twice as good because you were starting at a further place back from the others. So you had to therefore do catch up and then go past those you caught up with and surpass them. So what we were taught to do is that when you were absent, you call your classmates and you ask them what the assignment was. So when they told me, big and bold and brazen, said, we were absent, I was absent yesterday. And I was asking the question. I guess they couldn't understand what I was saying because I was asking the question, but why don't you have your homework? Because what I was saying is that they're there now. They weren't there yesterday. I understand that. You couldn't do the work that was assigned in the classroom yesterday. But I gave some homework, and the homework could have been done. All you had to do there was call your classmates and find what the homework was. Did you have your book at the house? And if you did, that's the assignment to be done. They walked in there very brazen. I wasn't here yesterday. That was a shock to me. But I began to notice a loosening of the culture so as make excuses as to why they couldn't go forward because there was some debilitating circumstance. Now it's the whole school system. They can't do anything because the schools are failing. Now we're going to have charter schools. And the charter schools, they say, are taking away money from the public schools. And we got to have competition. We got to have a choice. The competition was in the classroom. I was competing with a guy named Jimmy Williams and Lozona Doyle and some of Shirley Blake, a whole host of them. And that was my competition. And I was trying to be the best that I could be based upon the competition in that classroom. And I found that competitive edge in all the classes because they believe they're teachers also. I believe them saying got to be twice as good, and they believed it, and that's why we're in there doing what we were supposed to do. And when I found out why they were saying that, by the time I found out, I was at Wayne State University. And I was in a classroom now. I think I might have been the only black in that one class. I was the only black in that one class, and that was the time when they had the riot down there. So I'm going to the classroom, and they're all talking about the black people out there rioting, and then I'm in the classroom, have to listen to all the things they were saying. I didn't say anything about it. I wasn't out there rioting. I was in there competing. And when they found out that I was from the South, and they felt sorry for me because they said, you went to this school and you had this circumstance and you had these debilitating circumstances, and they told me how sorry they felt for me. Well, I didn't think I was going to allow them to feel sorry for me on the test day. So when they gave the test, and I had told them that when they give the test in the classroom, I'm going to be in the top 5 of everything they're given here in this classroom. I wasn't taught. See, I was not, this is before Whitney Houston. I mean, she can sing about it. I was told it. They didn't sing it to me. They told it to me. I was not meant to break. I was not built to break. It's too bad she only found it out when she was in her 40s. I was taught that in elementary school. And when they gave the first test, I was not in the top 5. I was in the top 2. And that was throughout those schools. When I found I was wasting my money going in there in these classes in the PhD program, I got so I got so tired of that nonsense. And anyway, this idea, see, that's why I can't buy the things that I'm hearing. Schools don't fail, and those grades are not the teachers' grades. Those are the grades of those who are putting forth an effort and to reflect the students' effort. How do we get a cultural shift that now begin to blame the buildings and blame the teachers in the classroom that are trying to teach? In these battle zones. We've turned these schools in the urban cities into battle zones because we're telling these children in these battle zones that white privileges disadvantage them, and all they can do in those schools is play basketball and football, which they can do excellent in those areas. Their lack of a good breakfast and a quality lunch and dinner and having lunch money and money to spend on some Air Jordans, that does not debilitate them from being the best basketball players in the school and the best football players in the NFL. 80% of the basketball players in the NBA, they can do all that, but they can't study because their father left home. And they're teaching this in those schools. Okay, anyway, we had that discussion. I'm going to continue to have that discussion because I'm not going to let them be on these programs and pass that nonsense down because it's that white liberal jargon that's actually defeating the black community before they get out the block. Nobody can be stopped unless they stop. And that's why they weren't able to stop George Washington when they would do anything. And that's why they didn't discuss him in the classroom because he was irrelevant. He couldn't stop black people. They didn't even discuss. I didn't hear George Wallace's name cross any teacher's lips in 12 years in the public schools in Birmingham. They never mentioned his name. I never heard his name in the classroom. In American government, Mr. Vaughn's class, one of the best classes I had, he's teaching government. I never heard Wallace's name. I heard them talk about the Constitution. I heard them talk about the Declaration of Independence. Maybe that's why I know it so well. And that leads me to another discussion we had yesterday, and as a matter of fact, this idea of abortion. One person was telling me that because that's what they're getting ready to come up with now, as Donald Trump names his choice Monday for the court, and he's going to name us a conservative judge, and they're going to overturn without any question. They're going to overturn Roe v. Wade, but it does not mean that abortions will be illegal in the country. What it would mean is the federal government cannot mandate it because it goes beyond the federal government's mandate in terms of the powers that are enumerated to the federal government. The government had, what I was trying to tell this one person yesterday, they talking about get out of my, excuse me for saying this, but this is what they said, get out of my vagina. The government is in your vagina by telling you that you can have the right to, the federal government, you have the right to abortion, or as you call it, you have the right to choice. I call it what it is. You had choice when you created the act. The government has told you you have the right to murder your children because abortion is murder. You can say what you want to about it. And the only reason the state sanctions it is because the people that are in the womb are not taxpayers and they're not voters. Once they become, you don't even have full citizenship rights in this country until you vote, able to vote. And that's the state now mandating in the personage of the woman that she has a right to go in her, let somebody go in her womb and murder her children. If you say that you're if they say the other side is pro-life, then the antithetical is not choice. The antithetical to pro-life is pro-death. And I don't care what the government says. I'm telling you the truth. Now, the federal government got involved in it. It's a state issue. There's nothing in the Constitution that delegates the federal government being involved in that. And I'm right and they're wrong. I'm big and they're small. And Matilda said as much in Matilda. Okay, got to get out of here as always. We're running over route with our ranting today, and I need to get back with you next week. Until next week, I want you to follow your dream. Because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.